They have bent our politics, bent our rules, continued to market, utilized the permission from a lack of regulation to create this horrific situation where my children and yours and their progeny are confronted with an untenable situation of a climate system that is not conducive to their life prospects. And they ought to be held responsible.
Welcome back to another Climate Emergency Forum. We're going to start with part 2, climate change under U.S. law. Once again with our special guest, Dan Galpern. Can we hear more about these initiatives that you were briefly touched on?
Okay, well, I described the first initiative, which is to seek administrative action through EPA rulemaking to impose a rising fee on oil, gas, and coal, so as to ensure that fossil fuels bear the full weight of their impacts through their prices. The second initiative is our petition that seeks not only a phase out of new and continuing fossil fuel emissions, but also removal of legacy fossil fuel greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, the entire petition, which exceeds 100 pages now, is at cprclimate.org. You can go there under the menu, learn. You can go to the subfolder actions and campaigns and see the whole page on that and read it if you wish. We are open to suggestions. As the name suggests, this petition seeks to both compel a phase out of continuing fossil fuel emissions and to compel a removal of the excess burden in the atmosphere. It's being submitted by us pursuant not to the Clean Air Act, where most action has taken place with respect to climate change, but pursuant to the Toxic Substances Control Act. In a nutshell, Section 6 of that act, the Toxic Substances Control Act, provides in relevant part, and here I'll quote, if the administrator, that is of the EPA, determines that the manufacture, the processing, distribution, and commerce, use, or disposal of a chemical substance or mixture, if any of that, or a combination of that, presents an unreasonable risk of injury to health or the environment, then EPA must, the word in the statute is shall. Shall means must. Shall by rule apply one of the following requirements to that substance or mixture to the extent necessary so that they no longer present such risk. In other words, you need to act to the point where these substances or mixtures are no longer presenting a serious risk of injury to health or the environment. So what are those requirements? Well, there's a number of them, but the main ones are, with respect to fossil fuels and their combustion products, including CO2. 1, prohibit or otherwise restrict the manufacture, processing, or distribution of commerce of such substance or mixture. So in other words, restrict fossil fuels or prohibit them. And number 2, prohibit or otherwise regulate any manner or method of disposal of such mixture or substance. Well, how do the fossil fuel companies and the utilities, how do they dispose of the substance that is CO2? They emit it into the air. That can be, under this statute, prohibited or otherwise regulated. And so in conjunction then, this statute, by allowing or compelling the agency to prohibit or restrict the mixture that is fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, or to prohibit or otherwise regulate any method or manner of disposal of the substance, which is CO2 or methane or the other greenhouse gases. In conjunction, this statute can serve as the fundamental source of authority for EPA to seriously address the climate crisis to the extent that sources within the United States are causing or contributing to climate change. Again, this would be done by rule. So, everyone will have their say through notice and comment rulemaking. The fossil fuel companies would not be deprived of commenting to EPA. But here, we're invoking this authority under the citizens' petition section of this statute, which compels within 90 days them to start rulemaking or else to provide a reasoned rejection, a rejection that we could then consider challenging in court. So this is a powerful statute. We are going to be invoking it comprehensively, and hopefully it'll receive a favorable reception by the EPA, and we can secure then from it a strong rule. Now, if a strong rule results out of this process, well then, as certain as the sun will rise tomorrow, the fossil fuel industry will challenge it in court. And we will come to defend EPA's strong rule. We will intervene in support of EPA if that occurs. But on the other hand, if EPA unreasonably denies, rejects commencing a rulemaking, or comes out with a rule that is inferior, well, then we will challenge such an adverse decision or such an impoverished rule in court. Either way, we intend to be there, and that's another reason why we're attempting to marshal the resources necessary to do all this work. So that's our second initiative. That one falls under the Toxic Substances Control Act.
I mean, it's amazing to me. I don't see how the EPA couldn't back that argument. On the other hand, I've seen and heard of some crazy things. For example, smoking tobacco is good for you. Nicotine's not addictive. One of my favorite examples is Dr. Claire Patterson, who discovered how harmful lead was to human beings and how he was reviled for so very long in his fight for the health of humanity. And that's quite a fight that you've got ahead of you, Dan, I must say.
Yes, but let this not only be our fight, everyone should join in, help us with this fight. It takes more than one person. It takes more than one person with 10 volunteer board members. This is a major battle. And by the way, we could use support even if you're not located in the United States, because what the United States does is important. The United States has contributed more greenhouse gas emissions to the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution than any other nation. So in some sense, we have a special burden of responsibility. And of course, a lot of the major oil, gas, and coal companies originated here, were supported by United States policy. So we need to turn the United States government around on this. And if we do that, well, then there hopefully would be a stronger international effort. There's other major actors here besides the United States, but we have the tools in the United States to reach the United States government. If we cannot even utilize our democratic system to get the United States to actually, rather than rhetorically, be a leader in the fight against this global threat, then we have diminished prospects internationally.
Yeah, I mean, there is some people in some European countries, particularly, that have gone after their governments and succeeded because their governments aren't reducing emissions fast enough. And there's a group in Canada called the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Okay, so they're using that type of language, which was, used in sort of disarmament talks, et cetera, non-proliferation. I mean, the non-proliferation of fossil fuels, it's that type of thing, because fossil fuels are killing us as well as any massive nuclear weapon would do. So you have lots of allies in different countries.
Yeah,
for sure.
that's right. And we should really think of the Paris Agreement in terms of a general fossil fuel settlement, just like a general nuclear weapons settlement. Of course, a small amount of fossil fuels will have to continue to be manufactured for purposes of manufacturing and plastics and the whole 9 yards. There are some industries that are exceptionally recalcitrant for straightforward physical reasons, where some amount of fossil fuel emissions likely will have to be accommodated by additional negative emissions utilization. But, on the whole, we need to eliminate most use of fossil fuels. And the major developed countries, as was called for in the original United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Treaty, need to lead the way.
Well, thank you so much for sharing the first and the second initiative. Are you able to share with us the third initiative, or is that still in progress?
I can talk about it generally because I've written about it generally, and actually one of my articles that I co-wrote called Atmospheric Trust Litigation, Making the Fossil Fuel Industry Pay to Restore a Viable Climate System. A reprint of that is on our website, available for anyone to download for free. And that has to do, again, under the principle that the polluter should pay to clean up its mess. It has to do with wider-ranging litigation aimed to require the fossil fuel companies to pay not merely for damages that are imposed through climate system, but actually to fix the problem, which requires removal of excess atmospheric CO2. But again, I think that if you can't do it through legislation, there may be ways of doing it through litigation. Litigation that may be brought in the United States or in Canada or in foreign countries and enforced in jurisdictions where the fossil fuel companies are domiciled or have significant assets. So, but in any event, these are our two existing initiatives where we need to marshal a substantial support and funds to see this through, not only to advocate at the administrative levels, but to also prepare a war chest for litigation battles that will certainly ensue, no matter its initial reception by the administration. And as we have seen with respect to other types of efforts, sometimes you lose the first battle and then you have to keep on going in order to win the war. This is not a contest that we can afford to lose. We need to figure out how to expedite the removal of our fossil fuel infrastructure and replace it with non-carbon based fuels in order to power our energy systems and power our transportation fleet, our manufacturing, and so on. This must be done. It's well recognized that this must be done in the international scientific community and the policy community. A relative handful of vested interests should not be able to determine whether or not we will be able to persist as a viable human civilization. So, I'm determined, and I welcome contributions and participation by everybody that this show may reach.
So, Dan, I can really see that the fossil fuel majors saying, we're just providing this product, but other companies, the energy companies or what have you, they're disposing of it, and how they do that is not our fault. We shouldn't be responsible for it. We shouldn't certainly be responsible for all of this. How would you parse out the responsibility? Who determines and how?
Well, the specific answer is a great question. The specific answer is EPA will parse out that responsibility in the course of the rulemaking. But let me just say this. There's a very well-known case in Europe, Milieu Defensie versus Shell, brought in the Dutch courts. Came down about a year ago, where this was the defense. We're not responsible, or all we do is put this stuff in the stream of commerce, said Shell. But we don't use it. There's all these other people, power plants, when you drive your car, people heating their homes with our gas. They're the ones putting this in the atmosphere. And the court said, sorry to use the overly legal terminology, the court said bullshit in Dutch. And you are responsible for so-called not only tier 1 and tier 2 emissions that you generate in the course of your production and distribution of fossil fuels, but also for the so-called tier 3 end-use emissions. Why? Because you are producing fuels whose intended purpose is combustion, so that when your product is used as intended, as you market it, emissions result. So, by the way, this doesn't mean that power companies should be, particularly investor-owned or state-owned power companies, should not have any liability. But there's good reason, including reasons of economic efficiency, to impose the burden on the major fossil fuel companies, who have the ability to raise their prices to compensate, and so that a price signal will be sent throughout the entire system. So I hear that argument, and I don't buy it, because the fossil fuels are produced with and marketed, and the fossil fuel companies have acted politically to protect their ability to market these products for combustion without concern that anyone would be liable for their emissions. And so they have bent our politics, bent our rules, continued to market, utilized the permission from a lack of regulation to create this horrific situation where my children and yours and their progeny are confronted with an untenable situation of a climate system that is not conducive to their life prospects. And they ought to be held responsible.
So it's really interesting work that you're talking about here. It's broad in scope and huge in scale. And I'm just wondering who the principals are that brought this forth.
The petitioners are Dr. James Hansen, who, as I may have noted before, was at NASA Goddard Institute of Space Studies for 40 years, leading their climate change research program. The atmospheric chemist retired from the University of Colorado, John Birx, who is well known for his work examining the impacts chemically of what would occur following a nuclear exchange, and the theory of a nuclear winter, where at least the northern hemisphere would descend into cold and dark following a nuclear exchange because of all the dust and smoke and fires that would be caused by a nuclear exchange. And Don Viviani, who is a chemist and also the board president of Climate Protection Restoration Initiative, who is retired from the EPA but worked there for 30 years, including as head of their Office of Policy Research and their Office of Climate Change Research. So we have three notable scientists who are the principal petitioners for the petition under the Toxic Substances Control Act, and also Climate Science Awareness and Solutions. That's Dr. Hansen's organization at Columbia University, and CPR Initiative itself. So 3 scientists and 2 organizational petitioners.
Thank you very much. I'm just curious, the organizations, for example, the organization that Dr. Hansen is spearheading over at the Earth Institute, are they involved on any level in this work that you're doing?
Yes, the organization itself, Dr. Hansen's organization itself, is also a co-petitioner in this. And Dr. Hansen himself was involved in the construction and continues to be involved in the construction of the petition. The petition is about 22 to 25 pages of legal material, and at least 80 pages of science. And a lot of that scientific material stems from Dr. Hansen. Dr. Birx and Dr. Viviani also have contributed to the construction of the science section of the petition.
So there's a famous saying that sometimes nothing happens in decades, whereas other times what would normally happen in decades can happen in a matter of weeks. So we're in the latter sort of situation because of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. So for example, the US has just decided that they will no longer accept any Russian fossil fuels. That's oil, gas, coal. And last year, that made up about 8% of US energy. And the European Union, which relies heavily on Russian gas and other Russian fossil fuels, have said that they're phasing out 2/3 of their usage by the end of this year. And there's all kinds of other things going on. Of course, this war is funded and fueled by fossil fuels. You know, Russia's exports are 60% of their exports. So it's everywhere in this conflict. Of course, the danger is that we just, open up the spigots and continue doing what we're doing. But this seems like me to be a tremendous opportunity for the US and many European countries to really go gung-ho into renewables and alternative energy sources. And there's also a saying, crisis equals opportunity. So if the world uses this as an opportunity to really reduce usage on fossil fuels, that would be like a silver lining. So I don't know if you've thought much about these sort of things and what from a legal standpoint we could do.
I'm thinking every day, every hour about Russian attack on Ukraine and the implications of that in many areas, including with respect to international energy policy and the international order. The determination and the heroism, really, of the Ukrainians in defending their soil is an inspiration to all of us, and hopefully this war can be ended without pressing Putin into a corner, frankly, from which he might feel compelled to lash out. And we all need to think about how we can responsibly attend to this. But, with respect to the energy implications, we could despair that, oh, well, we learned nothing from the 1979 Arab embargo of oil, and we didn't take that as an opportunity. But we also now have the climate crisis, and it's understood much more than it was back in 1979. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I think you're wise that to point out that we could think of this as an opportunity. The spigots should be replaced by non-fossil fuel generation rather than simply serving as an opportunity for American and European oil companies to go to town. On the other hand, it's still winter, and I would not condemn fossil fuel companies for trying to do something significant to backfill, especially in Europe. The United States, as you noted, can easily weather the turnoff of Russian supplies to the United States because it's less than 10% of the United States supply. I don't know how it is in Canada, but I would imagine that it's about the same or even less.
Actually, in Canada, we have zero imports of Russian oil.
Okay.
That's why Trudeau just a few days ago said we're not having any Russian oil coming in. It was just just a gesture.
You can't turn things around overnight to the extent that Europe has been heavily dependent of the United States, and the international community needs to come to the aid of Europe to replace those supplies, and also, frankly, to help with the enormous and costly refugee settlement that must occur, so that people are not withering and dying from exposure. But that's what I fear, and I fear continuing disruption of those supplies, continuing disruption of the international order in Eastern Europe and perhaps further afield, and we just have to make our way. But there's the Ukraine crisis, and there's the climate crisis, and to some extent, Russia's power would have been diminished had we learned our lesson in 1979. A lot could be done in the next year or years to limit the damage with respect to the disruption of supply from Russia if we vastly accelerate the use of non-fossil fuel generation and power. So yeah, we should learn this lesson too right now.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us once again here at the Climate Emergency Forum. So this has been a rather detailed discussion, and this was part 2. And thank you so much, Dan. We really appreciate having you with us and discussing these various initiatives. It's so important, the work that you're doing, and we all want to support you. So please know that we're going to put your information in the description for those of you who are watching this who might want to help Dan. We also invite you to like this video, subscribe, and if you have any questions or other topics that you'd like us to discuss, please put them below in the comments. We really do read your comments. We may not have time to get to all of them, but we do read them, and we appreciate what you have to share with us. And come back to our next Climate Emergency Forum. We love spending time with you. Have a wonderful day, everyone.